Part 2, The Tempest and the Truth. In a world defined by steadfast loyalty, what happens when devotion is bought by a stranger's sacrifice? We return to Clara Whitby and Nathaniel Gray as the worst storm in a decade descends upon the coast, mimicking the night of the original tragedy. Nathaniel is gripped by a fever that unlocks the fractured corners of his mind, forcing him to relive the horrific final moments of his best friend, Thomas Hale. Get ready for a shattering revelation. The truth is not a poem of enduring love, but a burden of wrenching guilt. Can Clara forgive the life that was chosen over the love she lost? And when fire meets water, will Nathaniel's true purpose finally be revealed? Redeeming a promise made not just by the sea, but by the heart. Part 4, The Truth Beneath the Waves. The sea, that great, merciless witness, seemed determined to force the truth into the open. The night following their strained encounter on the stairs, the atmosphere grew heavy, dark, and wild. A storm descended upon Port Haven. Not a passing squall, but a profound, malevolent echo of the very tempest that had taken the mariner's promise 5 years before. The wind howled around the granite tower, a high, desperate shriek that seemed to call out forgotten names. The waves below did not merely crash, they roared, shaking the very foundation of the light. Clara, her nerves frayed by days of suspicion and the terrifying spark of desire, found her strength failing. She sat by Nathaniel's bedside, having found him shivering violently, like struck by a fever that seemed to have been conjured by the storm itself. He was caught in a torment of fever and flashback, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged, fighting both the elements outside and the memories returning within. He spoke, not to her, but to the gale. Open quote, "Hold fast, Thomas. The dinghy. She won't hold us both." Close quote. Clara froze, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket. Thomas. Nathaniel began to relive the wreck, his voice a low, agonized rasp that cut through the thunder. Open quote. "The mast cracked like a pistol shot. He went over trying to secure the cargo." Close quote. Nathaniel writhed, beads of sweat standing out on his brow. Open quote. "I reached for him. Clara, I tried." Close quote. He recounted the horrors of the final minutes. The screaming sea, the splintering wood, the impossible choice between one life and another. He did not speak as Nathaniel Gray, the man who had lost his memory. He spoke as the man who had survived. Then came the agonizing climax. Nathaniel cried out, grabbing his own chest where the ring rested. Open quote, "The water, it was so cold. He pushed me away, swore at me to live. He said. Close quote. Nathaniel choked, tears tracking lines down his feverish cheeks. Open quote. "He pressed it into my hand. Thomas, he looked at the ring, then at me, and he begged me, 'Find her, Nate. Please, mate, find her. Tell her I kept my promise. Tell Clara I kept my word to come back to her. Just in a different way.'" Close quote. The final, wrenching words died in a broken sob. Clara stared at the shattered man, every drop of blood in her body seeming to turn to ice. The truth finally was laid bare, ugly and devastating. Thomas Hale had been Nathaniel Gray's best friend. Thomas had willingly given his life to save Nathaniel's, and he had entrusted his most sacred bond, the ring and the promise, to the man who survived. Nathaniel, overwhelmed by guilt and sworn to his friend's final wish, had sailed for Port Haven years ago to deliver the message, only for another smaller wreck to steal his memory and cast him up on Clara's shore, delaying his duty until this very moment. Clara stumbled back from the bed, a hand pressed over her mouth, not to stifle a cry, but to hold the pieces of herself together. She had not waited for a ghost. She had waited for a noble, perfect martyr who had kept his promise through death. The sea had not sent her a ghost of Thomas, but a survivor burdened by his life, a living, breathing testament to the love that had been tragically paid for. Her faith shattered. Her years of steadfast, unwavering devotion suddenly tasted like ash. Her beautiful, singular love story was tainted, not by betrayal, but by the overwhelming, crushing weight of reality. The storm outside roared its agreement with her internal chaos. Nathaniel's eyes flickered open, the fever momentarily broken by the complete, raw memory. He looked up at her, recognition finally clear and painful in his gaze. Open quote. "Clara," he whispered, the name now a desperate plea for forgiveness. "I tried to come back. I carried his word. I carried your name in the dark. I did find you." Close quote. He pushed himself up, trying to reach her, his face a mask of wrenching guilt. Open quote. "I am so sorry. I survived." He did not. Close quote. Clara shook her head, slowly, violently, The betrayal she felt was not from him, but from the universe. Her great, enduring love was not a poetic tragedy, it was a devastating debt. She saw not the handsome, haunted sailor, but a shadow wearing Thomas's silver ring, a symbol of a life purchased with the ultimate price. She could not bear the look of guilt in his eyes, for it mirrored the terrible, selfish guilt forming in her own heart, the guilt of the living who dare to desire happiness. Open quote, "Get out," she choked out, the word ripped from her chest by a pain more profound than any grief she had ever known. Close quote. Nathaniel flinched as if struck. Open quote, "Clara, please let me explain. I needed to tell you what he said." Close quote. Open quote, "I waited for a ghost," she screamed, the sound small and lost against the wind, yet ringing like a clarion in the tiny room. "And the sea sent me guilt in his place. You are his conscience, Nathaniel. You are the proof I must now live without him." Close quote. She pointed a trembling finger toward the door, tears streaming down her face, tears that were 5 years overdue. Open quote, "You have delivered the message. Now leave. Go back to the sea that kept you, and do not let me look upon your face again." Close quote.
Nathaniel, tell me what happened!
The waves, Clara. I couldn't save them. The sea took them all.
Part 5, The Storm's Mercy. The world outside the lighthouse was a maelstrom. The full force of the gale had returned, an elemental frenzy of wind and rain that made the granite structure moan. Inside, the emotional devastation matched the weather. Clara sat huddled in the main kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, hollowed out by the truth. She had given the order for Nathaniel to leave, and she intended for him to obey. Yet, as the hours passed, her fury did not settle into righteous peace. Instead, it curdled into a devastating loneliness. Her heart, which had been steadfastly devoted to a dead man, now ached with the painful immediate reality of the living man she had just banished. Upstairs, Nathaniel, despite the raw wound of her rejection and the remnants of his fever, was preparing to go. He gathered the few possessions he had, his own guilt pressing down on him like the weight of the water he had escaped. He understood her pain. He knew he was the embodiment of her loss, the unwanted substitute. He would leave her to her peace, even if his going meant sailing straight back into the arms of the sea. But fate, in the guise of the worst storm in a decade, had a different plan. Mr. Whitby, Clara's aging father, stumbled down the winding stairs, his face pale with fear, his oilskins dripping water onto the stone floor. Open quote, "Clara, Nathaniel, the lightning, it has struck the south turret's weather vane. The fire, it's spreading down the inner timbers." Close quote, the lighthouse, the beacon of Port Haven, the sanctuary that had held Clara's faith and her father's life's work, was on fire. The wind was feeding the flames with monstrous efficiency. Smoke immediately began to fill the main living quarters. Nathaniel dropped his satchel instantly, the guilt that had crippled him minutes before, transforming into decisive, terrifying purpose. This was not the sea of memory. This was immediate, brutal reality, demanding a life be saved. Open quote, "Father, get to the safety vault," Clara cried, grabbing a bucket. Close quote. Open quote, "The lantern room. I must check the lamp," the old man insisted, already halfway up the stairs, driven by a keeper's lifetime duty. Close quote. Nathaniel took immediate charge, his sailor's instincts sharp and clear. Open quote, "Clara, the flame won't last. We have to secure the lowest door against the wind and then get him down. We have to save the man, not the light." Close quote. But as they rushed towards the tower, a sickening crack echoed from above, followed by a shower of burning timber and smoke. The heavy, iron-bound door to the upper staircase, the one leading to the lamp room, slammed shut, jammed by fallen debris. Open quote, "Father," Clara screamed. She hammered futilely on the iron door, choking on the black, acrid smoke. Her vision was blurring with panic. Her father was trapped above, alone, with the fire spreading fast. Close quote. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathaniel moved. He did not ask permission or debate the risk. He found a forgotten maintenance shaft leading to the outside wall, a perilous climb meant only for repairmen, now obscured by smoke. Open quote, "I'm going up outside," he shouted over the storm's roar. "I can reach the watch gallery and break in." Close quote. Clara grabbed his arm, a primal terror seizing her. Open quote, "You cannot! The lightning! The wind will take you!" Close quote. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, redemptive light. The guilt was gone, replaced by the singular need to keep a promise he understood now was not Thomas's alone, but his own. inherent duty to the living. Open quote. If I die, Clara, he said, his voice hard with resolve, I will die trying to keep him safe. Tell Thomas that. Close quote. And he was gone, scrambling up the wet, slick stone, a dark silhouette against the lightning flashes. Clara could only watch in terror as he fought the elements, climbing higher into the heart of the storm. The wind buffeted him, the rain blinded him, but he clung to the rock, moving with a strength born of necessity and self-redemption. The minutes stretched into an eternity of fear. Then a final blinding flash of lightning illuminated the top of the tower just as Nathaniel reached the gallery. He smashed through the glass, disappearing into the smoke-filled watchroom. Clara collapsed against the wall, weeping with desperate prayer. Moments later, the jammed door to the stairwell burst open, the fire contained to the upper reaches. Nathaniel emerged carrying Mr. Whitby, the old man limp but alive, coughing terribly. Nathaniel's borrowed shirt was scorched, his skin blistered, and his breathing shallow. He had fulfilled the deepest, truest meaning of Thomas's final wish. Thomas had asked Nathaniel to find her and keep his promise. The promise was not merely a message, but the act of love and protection that Thomas himself had performed. In saving her father in the face of death, Nathaniel was Thomas's promise made manifest. As they escaped the collapsing tower and stumbled into the torrent of rain, Nathaniel's strength finally gave way. He collapsed onto the rough, soaked earth, his arms still instinctively holding Mr. Whitby safe. Clara knelt beside him, frantically searching for a grave wound. He was alive, but barely conscious, his body battered and burned. She held his head in her lap, oblivious to the rain and the storm's fury. In that searing moment, Clara saw what she had been blind to for 5 years. The sea had kept its word. It had returned love to her, just in a different, more complicated, and infinitely more real form. The ghost she had waited for had been a distraction. The life she needed was right here, clinging to existence in her arms. Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open, dark and exhausted. He reached a trembling hand toward the leather cord on his neck. Open quote. Tell him I found you, he whispered, before his eyes closed again. Close quote. He was fighting for his life. And for the first time in 5 years, Clara was not waiting for someone to return. She was begging someone to stay. She held him tight against her chest as the dawn, weak and uncertain, began to break over the ravaged coast. Open quote. Stay, she pleaded, her tears washing the grime from his face. Stay, Nathaniel. I choose you. I choose life. Part 6. The Lantern in the Dawn. Weeks later, the air was still marked by the scent of scorched wood, but it was mixed now with the clean, fresh smell of new beginnings. The lighthouse stood rebuilt. The tower had been painstakingly repaired, the damaged glass of the lantern room replaced, and the great beam once more swept its comforting arc across the recovering waters of Port Haven. The village whispers had changed, too. Mrs. Redfern now grudgingly admitted that Clara Whitby was not cursed, but a hero, and that the mysterious sailor Nathaniel Gray was a man of profound courage. Nathaniel, having narrowly escaped the finality of the fire, recovered slowly under Clara's ceaseless, gentle care. The physical scars would fade, but the psychic ones, the guilt of survival, had finally begun to heal, replaced by the quiet, broad, heavy understanding that life was a debt to be paid forward, not suffered in penance. The morning came when he was strong enough to stand on the clifftop, gazing at the sea, not with the terror of a victim, but with the measured perspective of a man who had faced the worst of it. He had decided he must sail again. It was the only life he knew, and a man who survives a wreck must return to the water to prove he has not been broken. He found Clara in the garden, tying a bouquet of late-season hydrangeas. Open quote, I must go, Clara, he said, his voice low. It was not a question, but a statement of necessity. I am a sailor. The sea calls me, not to punish me, but to use me. Close quote. She paused, arranging the flowers with deliberate grace, her hands steady. This was the moment she had waited for. For 5 years, her answer would have been rooted in a desperate, crippling demand to stay. Open quote. I know, she replied, looking up at him, her gray eyes clear and true. And I am the daughter of a lightkeeper. I cannot ask you to trade one trap for another. Close quote. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest, right over the place where the silver ring now rested, worn on a simple chain. Open quote. You were Thomas's living promise. You came back to me. Now, Nathaniel, I am going to keep my own promise to myself. I am choosing life, not waiting. Close quote. Open quote. You are choosing a hard road, my dear, he murmured, cupping her face in his hands. A life of loneliness, watching the horizon for a distant, perhaps impossible return. Close quote. A soft, genuine smile touched her lips. Open quote. Not loneliness, Nathaniel, just waiting that ends in a welcome, not a vigil. Close quote. She did not ask him to stay. Instead, she announced her intention. She would go with him. The lighthouse, her lifelong home, would be left to her father, who, now restored to health, was relieved that his daughter had finally found a path away from the cliff's edge. Before they departed, Clara performed one last ritual. At the very spot on the cliffside where she had kept her vigil, where the new, strong granite of the rebuilt lighthouse stood firm, she lit one final lantern. It was the same brass lamp she had lit for 5 years, but tonight the flame was steady and peaceful. She stood for a long moment, the wind crisp against her cheeks, looking out over the calm, vast expanse. She did not weep. She was merely saying goodbye to a perfect singular devotion and hello to a messy, glorious reality. Open quote. Thank you for keeping your word, Thomas, she murmured, her voice carried on the wind. You kept me alive until I was ready to live again. Close quote. Nathaniel walked up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. He did not speak, but merely stood with her, a silent understanding passing between them. He reached for the silver ring beneath his shirt, pulling it out. The tarnished silver, cleaned and polished, now shone brightly. He took Clara's hand, her left hand, which had been bare for too long, and placed the ring of the lost promise, onto her finger. It was a new commitment, an acknowledgement of the past that paved the way for the future. Open quote. It is yours, he said simply. It always was. Close quote. As the ship, a small, sturdy merchant vessel heading south, sailed into the sunrise, Clara stood at the rail. She turned back one last time to the cliffs of Port Haven. The lighthouse beam, her father's steady, reassuring presence, was the last thing she saw. Then she turned forward. She did not look for a ghost on the water. She did not yearn for the past. She looked at the horizon, the sea now a friend, a path, a wide-open door. Her hand, wearing the ring, rested firmly in Nathaniel's. The sea was calm. The promise had been kept. The waiting was over. And so the waiting woman finally turns her face toward the horizon. Clara chose life, not vigil, future, not ghost. The promise was kept, just not in the way she, or we, might have expected. Thomas Hale gave his life so that Nathaniel Gray could deliver the chance for love to Clara, proving that devotion can transcend even death. We hope this journey through the storms and secrets of Port Haven stole your breath and warmed your heart. If you love the depth of feeling and the sweeping romance of The Girl Who Waited by the Sea, please be sure to like this video, subscribe for more emotionally rich historical romances, and tell us in the comments below, what's the most heartbreaking moment in Clara and Nathaniel's story? Thank you for listening. Until the next high tide.